Hey guys, how's it going? Are you excited for Crisis on Infinite Earths? To be honest, I'm not exactly sure how I feel yet. DC TV for me is a bit hit or miss. Sometimes they focus a little too much on the melodramatic romantic relationships, and sometimes they actually remember that other characters exist outside of the star-crossed lovers. But on top of that, the writing is either a little too cheesy or a little too on the nose. That being said, in celebration of the annual crossover extravaganza, I went, hey, who's the best Superman? We've got three men in tights strutting their stuff for the crossover, but who wears them best? I decided to open it up to every live-action Superman there has been so far, at least the ones I had come across. And it was tempting to include some of the animated Supermans, but let's just stick to live action for the time being. And the qualities that I was looking for were the material they were given, the script and direction, the actor's actual ability, and the universe they created. So, let's get started. So starting off at number 7, we have Henry Cavill. Now, this might be a little controversial for some of you. Cavill is the modern-day silver screen Superman, and for some of the younger generation, the only Superman. The overall failure of his Superman is not entirely on him as an actor. In fact, he's actually an exceptional actor, as we've seen in many of his films. But the odds were stacked against him. The direction and the writing are mostly to blame for this, because what we're left with is a bleak and depressing depiction of Superman that causes mass chaos and destruction wherever he goes without care for those affected by it. So while we have the physical embodiment of Supes, he scowls way too much. If you ask me, Bruce was right to go after him. Not only is he a huge menace to society, but he's also horning in on the Dark Knight's whole shtick. Superman is meant to be a beacon of hope. He is the best of humanity, full of charm and charisma. So, where is that country charm? We know Cavill can play goofy and lovable, so where is it? The biggest strike against him in my books is that he kills. This new neck-snapping Superman sends the character in an entirely new direction. Superman doesn't kill. We have an entirely different universe for that. It's called Injustice. Coming in at number 6, Brandon Routh. Did I say that right? The film itself was sort of meh, in the fact that it had script and concept issues from day one. And it was supposed to be a continuation of the original Superman series with Christopher Reeve. But it lacked the same quirky charisma and levity that the original series had. Routh looked right for the part in terms of emulating Reeve, but that's really all he had going for him. He played an okay goofy Clark, but his Superman was entirely forgettable. I didn't get the sense of much of a difference between Clark and Superman. One was just a little more awkward and clumsy than the other. This movie should have been called The Melancholy of Superman, because all he does is mope around and stalk his ex-girlfriend. He listens to the world cry out for him, but he fails to be the beacon of hope that he needs to be. I get that this film was a continuation of the original series, but Routh was just a pale imitation. He failed to make the role his own in any way. He's a good actor. We've seen him in plenty of other films, but here he was just too rigid. One thing he did have going for him, though, is he didn't break the no-kill rule. Moving on to number 5, we have Dean Cain. Cain made a better Clark Kent than he did a Superman, but then again, it was in the title. The show was more of a soap opera, a romantic comedy, if you would. And while it did take the time to bring Superman into the more modern era, this Clark Kent was a little more earnest than he was awkward. But the show itself relied a little too heavily on that. And in the end, Superman sort of became a supporting character. His portrayal of Superman was a bit flat. It wasn't the greatest, and it wasn't the worst. And while Kane doesn't have the greatest range as an actor, his cheesiness suited the role if you take the show for what it was meant to be. Silly. Up next, we have George Reeves at number 4.
Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane!
It's Superman! Yes, it's Superman!
This may not be a name that everybody is familiar with, but if you've ever seen the 2006 film Hollywoodland, this is about this talented actor and his mysterious death. It was officially ruled a suicide, but a lot of people think something's off. What Reeves brought to the role was raw charisma. He treated Superman like he was bigger than just one person. A huge spectacle that allowed the audience to be sucked into the fantasy. But at the same time, there isn't much of a difference between Clark and Superman. How can you hide a secret identity if you're essentially the same person in either form? While he doesn't fly under the radar as Clark Kent, he does represent the old school 50s Superman. The one that beats up the bad guys and crime doesn't pay. He almost makes Clark Kent cool. And now on to number 3, Tom Welling, who without question has clocked the most time as America's Boy Scout, but without the tights and cape. In fact, he adamantly refused to wear the costume. I mean, you have a chance to be Superman, and you poo-poo it? Despite that, Welling brought a fresh perspective to the role of Clark Kent, one that was young, naive, and hopeful. It was a real coming-of-age story that allowed us to peer into his struggles with his own humanity. Clark matured into the selfless superhero he would become right before our eyes. The show gave us conflict without compromise. He had a defined set of morals that he would not break, and trust me, he was tested. When you get down to it, Welling was able to make the character of Clark interesting for 10 years. That's a lot more than most actors can do in a couple of hours. He never actually had to try his hand at playing the dual role, though. He was always Clark, even when masquerading as the red-blue blur. For that reason, the show began to drag in its final seasons. Clark's indecisiveness put a real damper on the show. And it doesn't help that he was way past puberty, and he still couldn't fly.
And the Crows take the state championship!
The number 2 spot is really going to divide audiences. Christopher Reeve. By definition, Christopher Reeve is the man who set the bar. And without a doubt, he is the most associated with the cape and tights. In fact, he's the one that Routh imitated in The Return of Superman. Comics of the time even changed to resemble him more. He really made a mark. Reeve was the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way, and he approached the films as it was dual roles, as he should have. You have Clark, and you have Superman. He was both a beacon of hope and humanity, and a sweet bumbling nerd. Easily overlooked as a meek Clark, but hard to miss as a charismatic Superman. We got to witness a stalwart moral compass and a compassion for humanity that other roles of Superman often overlook. The quality of the films declined as time went on, but really the older films aren't as bad as you remember, and the earlier ones aren't as great. But Christopher Reeve, he was great in everything. In my number 1 spot, we have the most recent Superman, Tyler Hoechlin. And oh boy, did I just piss off a lot of fanboys. Reeve is always at the top of everyone's list because he is the standard to which everyone else is held to. But at some point, that bar had to be surpassed, and I think Hoechlin did it. When the casting for TV's new Superman was announced, I was a little hesitant. I mean, Derek Hale as Clark Kent? Those are 2 very different roles, but damn if he didn't nail it. He looks the part, he has the bulk, and he's not a clone of Reeve. In reality, he is his own Superman. Aided by the fact that Hoechlin played 2 distinct characters on screen really pushed him to the top in my opinion. His Clark Kent is lovable and goofy and authentic and warm, But at the same time, his Superman is charismatic and bright, with a steely determination. You have the hero, and you have the man. Two separate entities. Hecklin made a confident, vulnerable, and charming Superman, and he did it as a supporting character. He shows weakness, he has a warmth to him, and he treats everyone as his equal. It makes me super excited to see where he's going to go with this character now that he's been given his own show. So that's it. Do you agree with me? Who's your number one Superman? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. So until next time, cheers!